Douglas Daily Dispatch, May 4, 1926. 5 million British workmen strike. Million miners are joined by unionists in general walkout. By Dispatch, AP Wire. London, May 4, Tuesday. A general strike in all the great industries throughout the country began at midnight. It affected close to 5 million workers, including more than 1 million miners. Another day of suspense of hopes and fears ended with a complete breakdown of last-hour negotiations between the government representatives and the Trades Union Congress. Throughout the day and night, every effort was put forward to bring about an agreement. The debate in the Commons adjourned about 11:30, with nothing accomplished, and large crowds remained assembled outside the Parliament buildings waiting the final announcement. The scenes at Westminster were reminiscent of July 1914. Downing Street was completely impassable, and the crowds lining both sides of Bridge Street, leading to the Houses of Parliament and Parliament Square itself, were estimated at many thousands, silently but anxiously waiting the comings and goings of the members of Parliament and other prominent personages. A.J. Cook, Secretary of the Miner Federation, of leaving the precincts of the House shortly before midnight, said to the newspapermen, "They have failed. The general strike is on tomorrow." Similar scenes were witnessed around the headquarters of the Trades Union Congress in Eccleston Square, which throughout the evening was besieged by volunteers offering their services. Late in the evening, from the room where the council was sitting came the strains of "Glory, Glory, Hallelujah," and the singing continued for several minutes. Printers also out. It seems as if a general stoppage of the press will be imminent, as many of the London papers were able to issue only early editions for the country, the printers quitting at midnight. All the wartime routine measures, so far as concerns vital supplies, are being put into effect at once, and there probably will be wartime regulations for the protection of the public. Theater managers held a meeting last night to discuss whether they should close down during the strike, but no decision was reached. A section of the crowd outside of Parliament amused itself for nearly an hour by singing "The Red Flag" and cheering for the miners. Another section vigorously sang "God Save the King." It looked at times as if trouble were brewing, but the police managed to keep the crowds moving and thus prevented disorders. Cook's statement. A.J. Cook, in a statement, said, "The government right up to the last has taken the side of the owners and has interpreted the Royal Commission's report to mean an immediate reduction of wages for the miners. That we have refused to accept and will continue to refuse by the help of the whole trade union movement. The only terms of peace that are possible are terms that will ensure the status quo for the miners in the coal fields while reorganization is taking place." One evening paper. Only one evening paper published in London yesterday. All the other continued on page 3. British Labour in revolt as strike spreads. London, May 4th. Organised Labour of Great Britain is in revolt. 5 million men are backing up the miners' demand for what they consider a living wage and proper working conditions. At midnight, a general strike of the industrial workers became effective throughout the country. This widespread demonstration will, unless speedily terminated, cause untold suffering, with the loss of millions in money. The last hours before the general strike call went forth were anxious ones. Thousands of citizens assembled in Parliament Square and the adjoining streets, while within the House ministers of the Crown and former ministers representing Labour battled in support of their respective contentions. Premier Baldwin criticized the Labour leaders on the ground that, in ordering the general strike, they were threatening the basis of orderly government and were nearer to proclaiming civil war than Great Britain had been for centuries. Ramsay MacDonald, the Labour leader, said the country faced a situation whose end and evolution not even the keenest observer could visualize. Parliament's crisis. Winston Churchill, Chancellor of the Exchequer, asserted that if this conflict were fought out to its conclusion, it could only mean the end of parliamentary government or its decisive victory. From a kind of apathy, the people of Great Britain and of London, the central point of the struggle, turned to anxious speculation as it became apparent that the negotiations for a settlement were to fail, for even the lowliest citizen realized what a widespread strike of this kind meant. With stoppage of railway and transport services, the cessation of all building operations, the possible suspension of shipping, a breakdown in the distribution of food supplies, the rationing of fuel and light, suspension of the newspapers, and interference with all business. Troops ordered out. Troops already have been sent to various sections where disturbances are most to be feared, but it is the expressed intention of both authorities and the labor leaders to do nothing of a provocative nature. The men necessary to keep the mines from flooding will be held at their posts. The railway managers will run skeleton services, and the transatlantic steamship companies have promised to maintain their sailings, if that can possibly be done. The labor men have agreed also to aid in bringing food supplies to the people, having emphasized that their fight is not against the people, but against the attitude of the government.
Seward Daily Gateway, May 4th, 1926. Labor in revolt ties up England in gigantic strike. 5 million men backing up miners. Out midnight. Narrow thoroughfares London unable to accommodate traffic. Milk transportation continues. Volunteer crews assist in Edinburgh. Great Britain faces revolution. Assert MacDonald. Unless speedily terminated strike will cause untold suffering and loss of millions of dollars. Many forms of labor-dependent major industries cease. London, May 4th AP. Organized labor of Great Britain is in revolt, with 5 million men backing up the demands of the miners for what they consider a living wage and proper working conditions. This widespread demonstration will, unless speedily terminated, cause untold suffering with loss of millions of dollars. The last hours before the general strike with the call, which went forth, were anxious ones. Thousands of citizens assembled in Parliament Square and in adjoining streets, while labor leaders and government representatives battled with Ramsay MacDonald, labor leader, who said the country faced a situation whose end would be revolution, which not even the keenest observer could visualize. Winston Churchill, Chancellor of the Exchequer, asserted if this conflict is fought to its conclusion, it could only mean the end or a decisive victory over the parliamentary government. Even the lowliest citizen realizes what a widespread strike of this kind meant. With the stoppage of railways, a cessation of all building operations, the possible suspension of shipping, a breakdown of the distribution of food, the rationing of fuel and light, and the suspension of newspapers. The government has made preparations, backed by thousands of volunteers, to continue what is known as vital services in the distribution of food, bread and milk to children, and its continuance as far as possible the means of transportation. The big places of business have arranged to provide sleeping and eating places for employees so as to eliminate the necessity of returning home at night. Nevertheless, there is certain to be a tremendous tie-up in all the big cities and immediate cessation in many forms of labor dependent upon the greater industries which are included in the Trades Union Congress. Later, 12 hours after the strike was called, the narrow thoroughfares were incapable of accommodating the motor traffic which followed the cessation of service on tram lines, railways, subways, and regular bus lines. Passengers in Piccadilly Circus, Trafalgar Square, and Parliament Square abandoned taxicabs and motor cars and proceeded to work on foot. The government's first bulletin over the wireless said railway information bureaus announced transportation of milk was working on a schedule in all the provinces. Conditions similar to those in London were obtained at Edinburgh, for with the aid of volunteers, they maintained a skeleton service of tram cars and buses. 2 newspapers continued to publish. The principal stations in Manchester were picketed shortly after midnight. No trains left today. Shapoorji Saklotvala, the only communist member of parliament, was arrested and charged with making a seditious speech in Hyde Park on Sunday. He was arraigned in the police court and bound over with sureties to keep the peace. The prosecutor read extracts of his speech, which a policeman took in shorthand. Saklotvala said in part, "I want the army and navy to protect the people, instead of the rogues and thieves of the master classes." Glasgow, May 4th, AP. The first violence in the strike was reported when strikers stopped and smashed the windows of several motor buses operating between Glasgow and the nearby country districts. The passengers were not harmed.
The Cordial Dispatch, May 4th, 1926. London general strike shows first approach to violence. Scarcely a wheel is now turning in British area. Large crowds prevent workers from going to their duties in London. London, May 4th, AP. Labour's first attempt to tie up all the industrial life of Great Britain has been mainly successful. Since the beginning of the general strike, no disorders of moment have been reported by the government's emergency services for supplying necessities of the population. Working volunteers are running a few trains, trams, and buses. Otherwise, scarcely a wheel is turning throughout the country. The beginning of the strike had a dramatic setting in London. Large crowds had gathered around the Parliament House and in Whitehall, where they whiled away the time singing the red flag. As the Big Ben boomed 12, a man clinging to the railing of the House of Parliament yelled hoarsely, "Comrades, the hour has struck." The great mass began a demonstration which ended suddenly in Eaton Square when a police escort scattered the marchers. The first bulletin issued by the government today over the wireless was a notice from the railroads informing the bureaus that the milk supply service was working according to schedule. First violence reported, London, May 4th, AP. The first approach to violence in the general strike came this morning at the East and West India cargo docks in the heart of the Communist district in London. Large bodies of men compelled scores of vehicles to turn back, and some of the lighter ones were overturned. The attitude adopted toward those going to work, even to women and girls, was far from friendly. All work ceased on the docks. French unions active, Paris, May 4th, AP. Leaders of French mine workers, railroad men, and dock workers are planning to defeat any attempts to ship coal to England during the strike. A joint meeting of chiefs of 3 unions has been called to decide measures to be taken. Felt in Argentina, Buenos Aires, May 4th, AP. The industrial crisis in Great Britain is important to Argentina, as this country gets most of its coal from the mines near Cardiff, Wales. Communist arrested, London, May 4th, Shapurji Skalatva, only communist member of parliament, was arrested today charged with making a seditious speech in Hyde Park Sunday. He will be arraigned in Bow Street Police Court. He was arraigned in Bow Street Police Court and remanded for further hearing and bound over with securities to keep the peace. Coal is blamed, New York, May 4th, over development of the British coal industries was blamed for the present strike by Sir Josiah Charles Stamp, president of the London Midland and Scottish Railroad, who is on a visit here. Strike is complete, London, May 4th, AP. The British general strike is complete in every particular, it officially announced at Labour headquarters early this evening. Keen American interest. Washington, May 4th, AP. As a bystander, the American government is taking a keen interest in the British general strike, but is saying nothing. Commerce Department officials, from Secretary Hoover down, declined to predict what the economic effects would be. England is an outstanding American customer, and it is generally conceded that the paralysis of business in England will have its effect here.
The Indianapolis Times, May 5, 1926. No hurled at Labour's peace plea. Call off strike. Then we will resume parley, says Baldwin. London fears battle. Communists gather. Disorders spreading. By United Press. London, May 5th. Premier Baldwin today spurned peace overtures made by the Labourites, announcing the government would resume negotiations when the general strike officially is called off. No government, under any circumstances, can ever yield to a general strike, Baldwin said. Baldwin's statement indicates the government's intention to smash the strike with the force at its command if the labor leaders persist in keeping the general strike order effective. Baldwin made his announcement after Arthur Henderson, Home Secretary under the Labour government, pleaded in the House of Commons for resumption of negotiations. "Won't you think it over now?" Henderson asked. "The position of the country in a few days may baffle the imagination unless something is done speedily. Even now there is trouble. The Commons ought to bend every effort to restore the negotiatory situation to a position where it was at 1 a.m. Monday when negotiations were off in Downing Street, and see whether it cannot try to settle the question by reason, not by force." Appeal to King. One other hope remained. A strong faction of the clergy planned to appeal to King George to intervene, pleading he is the only individual capable of finding common ground. A battle between communists and the police is imminent, Sir William Joynson Hicks, Home Secretary, told the Commons. He said several thousand communists and others are organizing a massed parade through central London and that they would undoubtedly be met by police and, if necessary, by soldiers. The reported parade was the first major menace to peace. Disorders spread. Disorders throughout England, however, were spreading. At Leeds, Strikers attacked strike-breaking streetcars, hurling coal through the windows. Several passengers were hurt. At Stoke-on-Trent, 7,000 strikes unsuccessfully sought to halt bus service, operating under police guard. Police dispersed them with their clubs, arresting 5. A destroyer and a submarine arrived at South Shields, where 1/3 of the population is idle. South Shields is an important shipping point for coal and coke and is a shipbuilding center. Crowds were thickening hourly around the gates of the East India Docks, and troops in Canning Town. Turn to page 3. Blars me. Jolly well serious. By Times Special, London, May 5th. The general strike has resulted in a beer shortage. Famous Cheshire Cheese Chop House had to close early Tuesday for the first time in the memory of its 100-year-old parrot mascot. Other popular pubs are closing.
The Evening Star, May 5, 1926. Troops ready to act. England is assured. Disorders increasing. Warships move to vital points. Both sides firm. Attacks growing bolder. Peace negotiations barred while general strike lasts. More trains operated. But trade is stagnant. Liners sail on time. Food plentiful. By the Associated Press. London, May 5th. The British government served notice on Labour today that the vital services on which the population depend for sustenance will be maintained, even if the armed forces of the nation have to be used. Announcement to this effect, made in the House of Commons by Sir William Joynson Hicks, the Home Minister, was one of the outstanding features of the second day of the great general strike. Both sides held firm today. The contending forces and the general public as well settled down for what it seemed might be a long, hard war. General attacks on trams and buses run by volunteer workers in Glasgow, Leeds, and other provincial centers were the only sensational developments of the day up to mid-afternoon. Warships placed for emergencies. That the government was prepared for any emergency along the Clyde side was indicated by the news that 3 large warships were in the river. The giant battle cruiser who had joined the Warspite and the cruiser Comus moved up the river to Glasgow. The government will not negotiate for a settlement of the coal miners' dispute as long as the general strike continues. Lord Birkenhead declared in the House of Lords today. Reports that negotiations for settlement of the strike had been reopened were categorically denied at Labour headquarters this afternoon and by the Secretary to Premier Baldwin. The nation remains calm and confident in the face of the national crisis. An official spokesman for the government informed the press at 6:30 o'clock tonight. Food and fuel supplies sufficient for many weeks were assured, he declared. The secretary of the National Sailors and Firemen's Union today told the Associated Press that he had cabled New York directing members of the union aboard British ships there to carry on for present. Future action will depend on the bout on the strike question, which will not be known until the end of the week. Crowds growing rougher. Crowds in the various rougher sections of London were beginning to show a menacing attitude, especially toward police, this afternoon. In the Limehouse district, which is one of the roughest districts in the city, taxicabs were driven off and other demonstrations were held. At King's Cross, the unfriendly crowds were so large that many of the big shops closed. A crowd at Southwark chased 3 mounted policemen who were forced to flee. Sir William, in his speech in the House of Commons, said the government was empowered to call on the Crown forces to assist in maintaining any services that the government deemed vital. He designated such services as electricity, maintenance of the electrical and mechanical plant and machinery of the Port of London, the transport of motor fuel, and continuance of the railway services. Cheers greet declarations. His pronouncement was greeted with loud cheers from Conservative majority. The Home Minister said that the great bulk of the electric light stations throughout London were working admirably, the government employing naval ratings and volunteers. Conditions regarding the railways were improving. Sir William said he proposed tonight to ask the community as a whole to enroll as special constables in much larger numbers. The 7,500 original specials were already on duty, and 3,025 more had been sworn in during the last 2 days. Parade is forbidden. In view of the danger that would arise, he had directed the police not to allow a projected mass procession tonight into the heart of London under the auspices of the Deptford branch of the Communist Party and the National Unemployed Workers Committee. He warned the House and the country against alarmist rumors. There have been rumors of riots here and there. The minister said there was one small riot last night in Poplar, one of the London suburbs. I want the country as a whole to stand firm in this grave crisis and not be excited or worried by rumors, he said. He did not mention whether he had heard the latest reports of disturbances in Glasgow and Leeds. The Home Minister asked the House to ratify the royal proclamation, declaring a state of emergency. This is already effective, but will lapse 7 days from date unless ratified. The emergency was declared for a month, Sir William said, and he hoped it would not be necessary to extend it. Former Premier Lloyd George remarked that he did not take the view that the present emergency would pass away easily. Henderson gives warning. Arthur Henderson, who was Home Secretary in Ramsay MacDonald's Labour cabinet, charged that the government had not been prepared to find means for settlement of the industrial crisis. If that is going to continue to be the attitude of this government, he said, then the position of this country in the next few days is going to be such as to baffle imagination. At this there was conservative crises of O. Henderson retorted, let those who said, oh, say they're prepared to go through the experience. Don't threaten, cried conservatives. The Labourite replied that he had not threatened. He was as much, continued on page 6, column 2. Passengers hurt by angry strikers. Rowdies concentrate attacks on buses in various British cities. By the Associated Press. London, May 5th. Fighting occurred in the Shepherd's Bush district of London this afternoon. When a tram car, running under police protection, broke down, a crowd gathered and began flinging missiles through the windows. A motor bus was also stoned and finally overturned. Then a free fight broke out, in which women participated. Many were injured by the broken glass. The police used their clubs freely. Rowdies injure several. Stoke-on-Trent, England, May 5th. AP. 5 persons were arrested and several injured in a fight between police and 700 rowdies, here growing out an attempt to run motor buses today. The bus windows were smashed and police were forced to use their clubs vigorously to break up the mob. 2 policemen hurt. Liverpool, May 5th. Hooligans attacked buses manned by volunteers in Wallasey, a suburb of Liverpool, this afternoon. 2 policemen were injured. The drivers and conductors of the buses were roughly handled. Tram manager blocked. Dundee, Scotland, May 5th. AP. The manager of the Dundee tram line, endeavoring to resume the service halted by the strike, took the controller of a car himself today. He had not gone far, however, before the line was blocked by workers, and he was forced to abandon the car. Attacks in Glasgow. Train inspector dragged off car and injured. Glasgow, Scotland, May 5th. AP. Disorders in connection with the general strike were resumed in Glasgow today. There were numerous attacks on buses. In the center of the city, a tramway inspector was hauled off a car and so roughly handled that he was taken to a hospital. In the town of Parkhead, the outlook was so alarming that mounted police were called out. Gangs of youths smashed the windows of one tram car, but the passengers escaped. So great was the hostility toward the omnibus service that hundreds of cars were withdrawn. One bus in the Renfrewshire district was overturned and smashed. 2 other big vehicles were badly damaged, and in many other cases of buses were forced to speed up to escape pursuing gangs. The battle cruiser Hood, one of the biggest in the British Navy, arrived today in the lower Clyde River and dropped anchor beside the battleship Warspite. The cruiser Comus has proceeded up the river to the city. Police protect jitneys. Extra force put on in Newcastle to patrol streets. Newcastle, England, May 5th. AP. Extra police, including a large number of volunteers, patrolled the streets of this mining center today to protect the jitney drivers, some of whom were attacked by gangs. A number of non-union motor drivers who were aiding in the transportation of passengers in the absence of continued on page 2, column 8.